So when you think of Utah, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Maybe it's those incredible red rock arches, or maybe world-class ski slopes. But you know, beneath that beautiful surface lies this amazing story of survival, a desperate search for a homeland, and a massive conflict that pitted a brand new religion against the full power of the United States. We're going to dig into how that conflict really, truly forged the Utah we know today.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start thousands of years ago with the ancient cultures that first called this arid land home. Then we'll jump to the dramatic arrival of the pioneers who wanted to found a new Zion. From there, we'll unpack all the turmoil that led to a full-on military showdown. And finally, we'll trace that long, tough path to statehood and see how all those early struggles shaped the Utah of today.
You know, before any pioneers ever crossed the plains, the land we now call Utah was already ancient. Seriously, for thousands of years, it was home to a whole series of resilient cultures who didn't just survive in this pretty challenging environment, they figured out how to make it their own.
And this timeline, wow, it just reveals an incredible depth of history. We're talking evidence of human life here stretching back over 10,000 years. Way later, around 600 CE, you see the Fremont culture pop up, known for their cool art and pith house shelters. Then, around 1200 CE, a new wave of migration starts with the arrival of Shoshonean peoples. They're the ancestors of today's Utes, Paiutes, and Shoshone. By the 1500s, the Navajo had also entered the region, creating this really rich and complex cultural landscape that the first European explorers would eventually run into.
So this ancient land was about to get completely transformed, forever. In the mid-19th century, a brand new group arrived, and they weren't looking for gold or conquest, they were looking for a sanctuary, a place to build their vision of heaven right here on Earth.
The members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons, were, for all intents and purposes, religious refugees. After being violently driven out of Missouri and Illinois, where their founder Joseph Smith was actually killed, they started this massive exodus. Their leader, Brigham Young, looked at the isolated and frankly pretty inhospitable Great Basin, and he didn't see a wasteland. He saw a promised land, a place they called Zion, where they could finally practice their faith in peace.
And their determination was just incredible. I mean, they didn't just survive in the desert, they made it bloom. Through these highly organized communal efforts, they engineered complex irrigation systems, they laid out farms, and they built towns. And this was so different from the sort of individualistic homesteading you saw elsewhere in the West. This was essentially planned colonization that really quickly established this thriving, self-sufficient society across a huge and unforgiving landscape.
But that success and that isolation, well, it couldn't last. The very things that made the Mormon society so unique were about to put it on a direct collision course with the United States government. This was a clash of two totally different visions for the future of the American West.
Okay, so at the heart of this whole conflict was this concept called theodemocracy. For the Mormons, there really wasn't a sharp line separating church and state. Their religious leader, Brigham Young, was also their political governor. Decisions were made for the good of the religious community, blending faith with the machinery of government. Well, to outsiders back in Washington, D.C., this didn't look like American democracy at all. It looked like a rebellious little kingdom.
And you can really see this clash play out right here on the map. The Mormons first proposed this massive state of Deseret, a self-governed state where they would be in charge. Congress said, absolutely not. Instead, they created the much smaller Utah Territory, which was going to be governed by federal officials appointed by the president. So right away, you've got this fundamental power struggle. Who's actually in charge here? The local religious leaders or the distant federal government?
And then came the issue that just poured gasoline on the fire: polygamy. When the Mormon Church publicly acknowledged the practice of plural marriage in 1854, it caused a national sensation. The brand new Republican Party seized on it, lumping polygamy together with slavery as one of the great evils in the nation. All of a sudden, what was happening in this remote Utah territory became a major political weapon and a moral crusade for the rest of the country.
So, with tensions at a total fever pitch, President James Buchanan decided he had to act. He saw Utah as a territory in open rebellion, and he sent the army to assert federal control. The Mormons, on the other hand, saw a hostile force marching to destroy them all over again. The result was one of the strangest conflicts in American history, the Utah War.
Just to give you an idea of the level of panic, think about this number: 2,500 soldiers. That was roughly 1/3 of the entire U.S. Army at the time. So to the Mormons, who had been violently chased from their homes before, this didn't feel like a police action. This looked like an army of annihilation.
Brigham Young, who hadn't even been officially told he was being replaced as governor, prepared for the absolute worst.
Now, the Mormon response was not to meet the army in some big open battle. No. Their militia, the Nauvoo Legion, was ordered to wage a guerrilla campaign of harassment and delay. They burned supply wagons, they stampeded livestock, and they scorched the earth ahead of the federal troops. Basically anything to bog the army down and buy time for a peaceful settlement.
And it was in this atmosphere of fear and just total war hysteria that the conflict's most horrific event happened. A wagon train of settlers from Arkansas, traveling through southern Utah, was attacked and killed by members of a local Mormon militia. The Mountain Meadows Massacre remains a deeply tragic and controversial stain on this whole period of Utah's history. In the end, the Utah War was a war with almost no combat. It's kind of strange. Through the help of a mediator, a peaceful resolution was worked out. The army was allowed to enter Utah, and the Mormons received a presidential pardon. But the whole thing was a political catastrophe for President Buchanan. It was seen as this expensive, badly managed overreaction that solved, well, none of the underlying issues.
So the war was over, but the conflict? Not by a long shot. The next 4 decades would be this long, slow process of negotiation, a lot of federal pressure, and ultimately, fundamental compromise as Utah tried to join the Union as a state.
Yeah, the path to statehood was a nearly 40-year political battle. You can see on this timeline just how much pressure was being applied. Congress passed increasingly harsh anti-polygamy laws, they seized church property, and they even took away women's right to vote. The real turning point came in 1890. The church president issued what's called the Manifesto, which officially ended church-sanctioned polygamy. And that was the huge compromise that finally cleared the way for Utah to be admitted as the 45th state in 1896.
Okay, so after finally achieving statehood, Utah began this really remarkable transformation. It went from being this isolated religious sanctuary to a dynamic and fast-growing player on the national and even the global stage.
In the 20th century, the world finally started to discover what the pioneers had found, the unbelievable beauty of this land. Its breathtaking landscapes became iconic national parks, drawing in millions of visitors. Its legendary dry, powdery snow turned the Wasatch Mountains into a global skiing mecca, which all led up to hosting the 2002 Winter Olympics. Today, Utah is one of America's fastest-growing states, and the new challenges aren't about irrigating a desert anymore, but about managing urbanization, water, and development for a whole new century.
And all this leaves us with one last question to think about. Utah's story is one of a people searching for refuge, building a society in their own image, and fiercely resisting outside control. So how do those foundational ideas, that deep-seated desire for self-determination, and that inherent suspicion of federal authority continue to echo in the state's unique culture and politics, even today? If you enjoyed this History Deep Dive, you can find a whole bunch more just like it in our U.S. State Histories playlist. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to Notebook Summaries for more explainers on fascinating topics. Thanks so much for watching.